Hey, thanks for tuning in. In this video, we're going to be talking about the mixing of meat and dairy. Is this forbidden by the Torah? Are we allowed to eat meat and cheese, for example, or is this something that's just totally forbidden by the law? What does the text of the law actually say? We're going to be looking at what the law says, where these ideas come from, and also we're going to be looking at some manuscript differences that offer some possibly interesting insights. So first off, this largely comes from the teaching in rabbinic tradition that we're not allowed to eat meat and dairy, we're not allowed to benefit from meat and dairy. And of course, there are various fine points that they have on this issue, but generally speaking, this is the rabbinic tradition on the issue. And there are three verses that they would point to in the Torah, in the actual written text of the law, to justify this or to support their belief. And let's actually look at what these verses say so that we can talk about them. First off, Exodus 23:19 reads, "You shall not boil kid in milk of his mother." Also, let's look at Exodus 34:26. "You shall not boil kid in milk of his mother." Finally, let's check Deuteronomy 14:21. "You shall not boil kid in milk of his mother." So as you can see, we have three instances of this command, and the command appears exactly the same way in all three instances. And however, the rabbinic traditions on the issue infer that these have different meanings, and that not only do they not mean what they plainly, literally say, which is that we're not supposed to boil a kid or a baby goat in the milk of the goat's mother, not only do they derive that this must be something that's not literal, but it is broadened to this just huge scope that in no way is seen in that actual text of the command. And a lot of groups, more recently especially, have caught on to the fact that these traditions don't exactly line up with the text frequently. And so this one in particular, there's not any actual plain support in the text that tells us we're not allowed to mix meat and dairy. There are words that could be used to talk about meat just in general, and that it could talk about milk just in general, but instead, when we're looking at the actual literal wording of what the law says, the literal wording of the command, we're told that we're not supposed to boil a kid in its mother's milk. So this offers a different perspective on the command than the tradition would lead us to believe. And an argument that comes up, and that has come up in more recent years, is that the reason that we're not allowed to do this is because it's a pagan practice, and that it was a practice done by the Canaanites and part of their worship ceremony, therefore we're not supposed to mimic it. And while this might make sense, and while there may be sources to support this, I'm not sure that there are in terms of actually citing, here is the Canaanite practice kind of thing. I'm not sure that these sources exist, and I would also caution us to be careful about just assuming reasons for commands. I've talked about this in another video, but essentially, if we just assume these reasons without much justification, without actually textual justification, it can get us into trouble. But we're plainly looking at the wording of the command, and we're seeing that it's talking about something other than just mixing meat and dairy. It's talking about something different. And in my years of study, I've also come across some interesting manuscript differences that relate to this issue. First off, in the Samaritan Pentateuch, and of course if you've seen my Samaritan Pentateuch video, you know this is coming, Exodus 23:19 in the Samaritan Pentateuch tells us that he who does this sacrifice forgets and enrages the God of Jacob. So not only do we have in the Samaritan Pentateuch talking about boiling a kid in its mother's milk, But it goes on to explain that this very thing is a sacrifice, that it's talking about a sacrifice according to the Samaritan Pentateuch. And that's an interesting, actually ancient reference to this being a pagan practice. Now also, if we look at the Septuagint in Exodus 34:26, it reads that you shall not present a kid in milk of his mother. So it uses a different word in this situation than just the boiling or cooking. And it actually talks about presenting as an offering, essentially, that oftentimes this word is used to refer to offerings. And so here we have, once again, affirmation of it being an offering. It's not just about a normal cooking practice. It's talking about making an offering of a kid in its mother's milk. So we have two manuscript differences that support this, and we have zero evidence that support an overly generalized view. If we just look at the plain wording of the text, we would already be concluding that this is something different than mixing meat and dairy. Boiling a kid in its mother's milk is not an issue of mixing meat and dairy. It's a different issue. Just by looking at the plain text, we would see that. And it just affirms that even further, seeing these manuscript differences that actually reaffirm and support that yes, it's talking about a sacrifice. We're not allowed to make that sacrifice. So there is not an equivalence here of mixing meat and dairy with doing this sacrifice. If you eat a cheeseburger, it's not the same thing as boiling a kid in its mother's milk. They're two completely different things. And assuming that we're talking about clean ingredients and clean components to the meal, feel free to have that cheeseburger. Feel free to eat that meat with that dairy. So thanks for watching. Feel free to share this video and to like it if you found it useful and informative. And feel free to subscribe if you have not already, so we can stay in touch and so we can talk about more Torah issues. Thanks for watching. Remember the commands. Peace.